output stream looks
Yeah,
pretty good.
see
So I
the
guess we'll
green
just go.
circle moves when I talk in Discord, and the green bar shakes when I talk in OBS. So that looks like we're. I can't tell if it's. I can't
Interesting.
do anything else to tell if it's working or not working.
Yeah. YouTube's advisory just said, you should stream at a lower resolution. 1920 by 1080 is not optimal.
George says your stream sucks, by the way. Okay. Is there...
I mean, we just started streaming a second ago. It was not actually streaming until literally like 3 seconds ago. All right. Anyway, I think we're good to go. It's Thursday, April 23rd, 2020. I'm Rim. And this is Geek Nights. Tonight, we are going to revive an ancient Geek Nights tradition, a series titled How to Not Suck. Tonight, how to not suck at baking.
Let me just make sure 100% that we have not done a baking show.
I searched for it. I couldn't find it.
We did do a show about bread, but I don't think it's about making bread. We talked about the bread knife. Yeah.
All right. Yep. I
Also, that was
searched. I did
2010.
look
It
for
was
all
10
the
years
How to
ago
Not
we
Sucks
talked about
too.
bread.
Yeah. We did How to Not Suck at college twice. Okay. Let's start with the news bits. So yeah, we're just plugging along, doing the show from home. Hopefully the stream on YouTube is looking good because we're still using a new pipeline that I'm tweaking. On Monday, we'll talk about that pipeline and explain what we're doing in a little more depth because I got some fancy, well, not fancy. I actually got the lowest tier, most bootleg possible hardware.
Oh yeah, you gotta let me know how
out
that
this
works,
weekend.
and if it's good, I'll buy one. Or two.
Yeah, because I bought the cheap one, like the one that you sent me. I bought it on Amazon instead of from Alibaba. So I paid like an extra $40. But it arrived. It powered up. I bought some wasabi batteries instead of the even more.
That's also what I was gonna
batteries
do because it seems like a lot of the. I guess we're getting off topic here, but a lot of the various not super pro AV equipment that you can buy, like lights and recorders and encoders and these little, the cheapo versions of these sorts of things for video at home, all take these particular model of Sony battery.
Yep, I have 3 of the actual Sony battery,
right.
and
it's like a battery that Sony
ones.
camcorders use. So they're basically like, hey, most people are using these Sony camcorders. They have these batteries. Let's make our stuff use the same battery. And it must be a battery that's easy to interface with or something. But as a result...
Yep, it's the one with the 2 little prong holes
so it's like,
in like the top.
I got Panasonic shit, and now I have to if I want to battery power any of this other stuff, I have to go out and buy Sony batteries for devices I don't have.
So even better, all my cameras are Panasonic, but every other device I have, including my LED panels, are Sony battery compatible. So I just have 2 piles of batteries, and thankfully, the 2 batteries for my camcorder were free because of the camera replacement. But yeah, so far I've streamed. You've streamed 5.7 gigabytes of data to me, and I've streamed another 5.6 gigabytes of data to myself, and then I've streamed 14 gigabytes of that to myself again, and then I've streamed it.
Yeah, but to YouTube we're sending way less because your CPU.
To YouTube we're sending 6 megabits
your
per second.
Your encoder is chopping that down.
Yep. And I'm using 61% of my total horsepower
12%.
on this machine to make this work.
Not even. Less than 12.
I mean, I'm running 2 OBSs and an Nginx RTMP server. So, yeah, there is some news. So, PAX, Penny Arcade Expo, as you know, we are not attending any conventions, nor are we performing
we're not
going to,
right, we might be, but we're not going to say we are until we 100% know we are, because I don't want any...
But I can say with certainty, PAX West is the first possible convention we would appear at. As in, the best case scenario in the world is we attend and perform at PAX West.
But if you go to PAX West
like,
thinking we're going to be there, we
case.
might not be there, if it even happens.
Yep, like Kineticon, I'm they've said they're still going to happen, but as we know, conventions can't really say they're not going to happen until they're forced to say they're not going to happen.
So Penny Arcade announced that PAX West, as of right now, they want it to happen, and they haven't canceled it yet, and they're planning for it to happen, and that you shouldn't buy badges until you shouldn't buy tickets until airplane tickets, hotel rooms until badges go on sale, right? So
yeah, this is not like a normal year where like I booked my flights for PAX before they even start selling badges.
Right, so this is because they posted an announcement that they're not canceled, and I said, hey, yeah, guys, conventions can't really announce that they're canceled because, for example, they might have a contract with the convention center, and that contract says you have to pay us to rent our building for these few days. And if they just say, you know what, nah, I don't wanna, then the convention center could be like, well, we don't care if you have your convention or not, you got to pay, right? We're open, you...
Yep, capitalism doesn't care about
like when
your
you
human
cancel a plane ticket, it's not refundable, right? So, but if an act of God were to happen, like say a pandemic, forcing them to cancel, for example,
force majeure.
So let's say
in
the
some
governor
cases.
of Washington State says, yeah, no large gatherings more than 100 people, and that time period includes PAX West. PAX West says, well, we didn't want to cancel, we just had to. We want to put so now they don't have to pay the convention center, right? So that's why these events, even though they might want to cancel right now, they can't until they can, and there also might be other things. Who knows what their agreements are? They might have insurance that pays out. Who knows? So as a result, Penny Arcade, I guess, says, Ryan Hartman replied to me, right, from Penny Arcade. So it's public. It's out there on Reddit. You can see the comment. So it's not a secret. But he's like,
yep. Very carefully
he says we were not forced
obviously.
to make an announcement because of some insurance clause. It's like, okay, you weren't forced to make an announcement, but you didn't, deny the fact that, yeah, if you just cancel of your own volition, you could be boned, right?
Yeah. I would suspect, and I do not know, again, we have no knowledge about the internal workings of this, but I know at other non-PAX conventions, it's not that anyone has had to say anything. It's more that not saying anything is also an option. You just can't say certain specific things yet.
Not saying anything really also leads to lots of, while saying something can always get you a bad reaction. Not saying anything can also get a bad reaction. Like, hey, how come we haven't heard from X, right? So it's like, if you don't say anything, people will be like, why haven't...
I am not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, but not saying anything can get you in trouble with humans, but it will often not get you in trouble with
PR-wise, right? If you don't say anything at all, someone might be like, how come you haven't canceled yet? You got it right?
Yeah.
I saw that happen with...
But if you're like, hey, we're trying to cancel, we just got to get out of these contracts.
Right,
that's
I saw
that
happened with the bike club in New York City, right? They didn't cancel. They're like, yeah, we still want to ride. They didn't say anything. And people were like, how come you haven't canceled all the rides yet? They're like, fine, we canceled. Right? But... some people who were like, yeah, we don't, they said something. They said, we're not sure if we want to cancel yet. Then people come out, for and against, right? And start yapping. So
yeah,
you can't win.
But Ryan gave a really good response here. Cause basically what it sounds like and you can read the post, like, don't think I'm going to put words in Ryan's mouth, but they're basically saying, look, we want to do PAX if we can. Like, we're hopeful. But at the same time, like, don't buy your plane tickets yet.
And if you
guys.
do,
seriously,
get refundable plane tickets. I heard from I don't know if this is true. I heard that Alaska Airlines, which goes to Seattle, is having refundable tickets for like the rest of the year. So if they go where you want to go, and that's true, verify.
So I
it.
actually
Don't trust that I said it.
Aside,
verify
I had an Odyssey,
but
because I had made plans with Emily to travel to Japan, like way before any of this was even like. Before any of this happened, and then we canceled to avoid flying through China and booked somewhere else and then had to cancel those. I ended up having like 10 grand worth of plane tickets that I couldn't use, waiting for refunds for
right. That's the thing is, even if you
can
get your refund, make sure you can afford to have your money tied up somewhere. Like Rim, who's very wealthy, you shouldn't be sending him any money on Patreon.
Very good.
Look at all the money he has.
Yep. Air China was really good. They were like, yes, we'll give you a refund. The world's fucked right now. Jesus. Like Air China was great, but the refund could be given to me within 6 to 8 weeks. So I was lucky that I had enough like space on my credit card to just hold on to that until they gave me my money back. But JAL actually wouldn't let me cancel until like shockingly close to like the deadline for flying. They did eventually let my cancel. Basically, every week they extended how far out they'd let you cancel for a refund by 1 week. So every week they pushed it one more week, one more week, one more week. And eventually, after like 4 weeks, I could cancel.
All right.
Yep. But if any of you out there are in a situation where like you have non-refundable things and you got screwed by all this, charge back the credit card. That is the secret hack of the world. Use it together. Use it in peace. Do not use it on small-time artists.
Consequences of doing that, right? Like if you do it when you shouldn't have done it, then you could be in trouble. You also might, for example, let's say you sign up for like an online service and they scam you. So you right, so you charge back. Well, now they banned you forever. It's like you have to be willing to,
Yeah, you're burning bridges when you charge back, but charging back right now when this is an emergency can
there are also
often
sometimes
be the way
fees
to
for
protect
charging
yourself.
back.
So
if it's not fraud, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it depends. There's a lot of situations, but Google charging back if you are desperate because of a situation like that. I'm sure there's someone out there listening who is like holding on to some plane tickets or an Airbnb reservation or something that they got screwed over on.
Any other news besides the...
Yeah, so if you didn't notice, we haven't talked about it at all because we generally try to avoid talking about movies that don't have a date. Because movies can get done, like post-production is done, the film is ready, it's about to be mailed to movie theaters, and then the film disappears forever.
Look how many stories there have been about live-action Akira, live-action Evangelion 4. As long as I can remember, probably the entire millennium, there have been ongoing stories about those two things, and those two things have never happened and probably never will happen.
Yep. But there is a Dune movie coming.
Another one.
Yeah. The problem is the Dune movies I wanted to see are the ones that didn't come out.
Right. So if people don't know, or you've probably, we did Dune as a book club book. You should go read at least the first Dune book and then be done with it.
Yeah,
just
don't read any
other
Dune books.
Spoilers. Anyway, there was the Dune movie that actually came out, which is something to see.
Yeah, I would not say it's terrible, but it is not
just,
great.
It's notable.
It's a movie.
Noteworthy.
To quote the Prince of Nothing, I remember.
Fear is the mind killer, or whatever. Right? You got to know your nerdy shit, right? And then there were these other Dune movies that didn't actually get finished, much like the Akira and Evangelion live action movies. And there's a
Dune is one of those properties that's just impossible to approach.
Right? Jodorowsky's Dune is like there's a movie about movies that didn't get made. Right, and how great that they were going to be. Who knows if they're actually going to be great? It could just be showing them in a great light.
I think it definitely would have been memorable,
like the
even
one
if it
that
wasn't
did come
great.
out. So,
yeah. But the new one that's coming, from what I have read, because I follow that Maudib style Twitter account, which is like
Muad'Dib.
Yeah, it's
Maudib.
It is an A+. Basically,
sounds like
this
a
account
snack
has spent
like kids are dipping like the something like
dip
that.
dabs. But that Twitter account mostly existed just to shitpost Dune memes that really did not make sense to most people who are not deep in Dune. Exactly. But that account's been talking a lot about the movie, and I actually started reading about like who they cast, and I looked at some of the stills from the principal photography. I'm not saying it's gonna be good, but it has a chance of being good, and I'm pretty confident it's actually gonna come out.
I mean, that second Blade Runner movie came out, right?
This year. Yeah, and that Blade Runner movie, if you have not seen the second Blade Runner movie, you should go see it because it is actually fantastic. Like, I say this loving the original Blade Runner, it is a worthy sequel. Like, it is equally good but different.
Not that Ghostbusters came out, right? New one, right? They're actually successfully releasing
the Dune movie. But I have, over the last few weeks, moved from being aware that there is a Dune movie coming to being cautiously optimistic about liking
place.
the Dune movie.
I would not go.
I know it's dangerous. That's why
I'm
it's
not
news.
going there with you.
I am.
You're going alone.
Fast forward. Geek Nights on April 23rd, 2030, when Scott's like, hey, weren't you excited about that Dune movie that never came out? And I'll be like,
well, I'm going to go see live action Akira tomorrow. Got my tickets already.
And a brief little news, not a meta moment because it's not technically Geek Nights, but Emily and I watched Dumbo again.
Did
the
you
other
watch
night.
original
We're going to record a
racist
podcast about it. We watched the Disney Plus version. So it has the crow. We'll talk. Well, so we're going to do a podcast and talk about that because there are two things in that movie that need to be discussed that are related to racism. And
Only two?
It is not. There are two
okay.
specific
I think there's a lot more than two. I'm like a...
No, but there are two that are very specific and relevant to this discourse
like
that
we're
Dumbo, going to discuss. But
in terms of
Dumbo, I learned something about Dumbo I didn't know. Dumbo is one of the first movies to use synthesized voices.
For which character? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I know a lot of things about Dumbo.
The train. When the train is talking, that is a full-on fucking synthesized
I thought it was a person
voice,
talking into
similar
like a kazoo type thing.
No, it's more akin to the early instruments where you could talk through your guitar.
I think it sounds like a person talking through like a filter of some kind.
Yes, it's basically a person talking through an
Oh, but
early
it's not a synthesizer for persons
similar...
talking into it. That's just like a, a
I'll
synthesizer would be like
Sinistar,
where it's like, run, coward, right? And it's...
Yes, but it was a synthetic voice, and I can explain the details. It's kind of like how Fantasia had that ridiculously complicated 9-track audio. This was like an early version of modern voice synth technology with a lot of limitations and a lot of... what did I describe this to Chase the other day? The audio equivalent of rotoscoping. But we're not going to upload the Dumbo episode yet because we got too excited and watched Dumbo first. So we have not yet watched and recorded an episode on a movie that came out before Dumbo and after Fantasia.
I haven't heard of The Reluctant Dragon ever.
Really?
I know Pete's
I've
Dragon.
heard of it. I've just never seen it. But I'm actually...
I don't know. I don't know The Reluctant
Pete's Dragon. As a kid, I really liked that. I, as a kid, loved the shit out of Pete's Dragon. But I suspect... I do not want to watch that movie again, lest I ruin my memories, because I do not think that movie is good, and I suspect that it will
holds
not
up,
hold
except
up.
for the racism.
Yeah, and the racism is less. It is not as bad as the racism in Fantasia.
Says white.
Good
person.
Lord. Yeah, go watch Fantasia and look at what they cut out. I'm really glad.
I don't
Disney
really remember
cut
what
that out
racism was cut out of Fantasia.
Yeah, there are some centaurs that have been removed for a really good reason.
I do not remember those centaurs, but then again, I've seen Dumbo maybe 100 times, and I've seen Fantasia.
Look, they are so bad that contemporary newspapers to when Fantasia came out were like, holy shit, that was racist. Yeah. But otherwise, let's get into things of the day.
So this is Dude. I actually still don't know if it's a Korean dude or a Japanese dude, but what does it matter, right? I think they live in Korea. They clearly speak Japanese and Korean and English. And this dude is named Night Tempo. That's the only name I know of this person. And I discovered Night Tempo because I went to a future funk, dance, I guess, party, club, show, whatever, when that was still a thing you could do. And Night Tempo appeared, and I was like, at first, I saw this person in the crowd who looked like a time traveler from 80s Japan, wearing like a full Puma, like windbreaky tracksuit kind of thing that was clearly vintage, right? And like those giant glasses, right? And this really wild haircut, and I was like, that person looks like they just were a time traveler from 80s Japan. What are they, that's pretty cool. And then that person who was, like before the show, they were down, low. So I thought that they were like an attendee. No, that was Night Tempo right? So Night Tempo is like been like increasing their, I don't know how you say this, prominence. I don't know, whatever. Right. But I want
their presence.
So think about this,
P?
right? There are a lot of nerds out there who have nostalgia, right? That's like most nerds, I think. And a lot of nerds have a nostalgia for a specific thing. And they'll often express this nostalgia by like collecting, right? Or getting into communities of people who share the nostalgia, right? But, it's very rare that a nerd with nostalgia for something who's right will then sort of actually help to revive that thing, right? It's like how many model train nerds are out there, right, with their hardcore model train nostalgia, but
who's driving the model train community to get them on Twitch?
None of them can push the model train community forward any more than the model trains that they set up during holiday season and then tear down. That's like that's their peak.
Yeah, like even the speed running community was pretty moribund until a few people like really worked to push it broader into the mainstream and make it more accessible and interesting.
So, the Night Tempo has nostalgia for, Showa idols, Showa era Japan, things like red plastic cassette Walkman and Urusei Yatsura wristwatches, right?
I mean, I'm looking at your thing of the day right now, and track 2 is called Junko. I assume that's like a WoW Junko. Track 3 is Ayumi. I assume that's
I don't know if
Ayumi
she counts as
Hamasaki.
Showa era, but the point is, right, that the number one thing that Night Tempo is all about is old city pop music from the 80s, right? So a lot of people don't know city pop music if they weren't Japanese people in the 80s, right? And it sort of the genre sort of disappeared mostly. But there happens to be this overlap of anime nerds who watched 80s anime who have heard these sorts of sounds, right? Like if you listen to like the original Macross TV soundtrack, it's very city pop, right? You just didn't realize that was the genre at the time, right? And, the most famous city pop song, at least in the West, perhaps in the world, is Plastic Love by Maria Takeuchi, right? And Maria Takeuchi, she was being interviewed somewhere, right? I just saw a short, very brief clip, right? And in this clip, she says, right, Arigato Night Tempo-san. So that would be like if 4X games died. No one played them. And then I went out and I made some remixes and mods for Civilization, and they got popular. And Sid Meier was like, thank you, Scott Rubin. Right? For bringing back 4X games and making people care about them again, right? So, if you have any nostalgia for the city pop sound because you watch old anime or not, or you're a Japanese person from the 80s, or I don't know, but it's good music. Night Tempo
I'm playing some of these tracks while you're talking. These are that like reverberating echo of that synth
right. So
bass
Night
beat.
Tempo
Oh,
just
man.
released the third and final installment of his series Showa Idols Groove, in which he takes hit tracks from Showa era idols, right, and remixes them to make them banging for the 2020s, as if a time traveler, as if the coolest DJ from 80s Japan time traveled to 2020 and learned how to use a computer, right? Right, that could make music. So yeah, you have to go to Bandcamp to get these, because I'm pretty sure you can't put this ones on Spotify. But some of his other music is on Spotify that can be put on Spotify, right? So, but Bandcamp is the way to go, and this particular album is pay what you want, so you can download it for $0, $1, $100.
Oh man, I scroll down and it's like, oh, if you like this, you'll also like. And the first thing I see there is Sailor Wave.
So there's if you don't know, there's a company, I think it's in Hong Kong, called Neon City Records, and it's someone who basically has. There's a story about Neon City Records actually on Bandcamp if you search for it. I don't have the link right now that tells the story of how they were created. But what I heard is basically someone had the ability to produce vinyl records and cassette tapes and liked this kind of music. So they made a little tiny record company and got all of these similar sounding people together, right, to make music. And they do very limited runs of vinyl albums and cassette tapes. Right, so you could buy Showa Idols Groove. It's probably sold out now, right? Because they only make so many. But you could have bought this album on cassette or vinyl, right? And they do really fancy production, like neon-colored records and really awesome artwork inserts in the tapes. Of course, I wouldn't buy any of those because, I'll take
I
the
don't want physical
MP3s,
things
please.
anymore.
But maybe you want a vinyl that just sounds shittier, right? Go ahead.
So, speaking of sound, my thing of the day, Nintendo Labo,
Yep.
like the cool cardboard
Yep.
thing where you can just like make stuff. One of the things you can make is a little keyboard, and you can make these little like waveform things you stick in, and that determines what sample will play when you play on your tiny little like synth keyboard. So, it turns out it actually does just look at the shape of that specific waveform, like the piece that you put in is the sample. It's actually the shape of the wave of the sample.
Yeah, people don't realize that
this
the
video,
Nintendo Joy-Cons, if you have some Joy-Cons nearby, look at the front. They have a little infrared camera on the front. And there's almost nothing that uses that, but Labo uses it excessively. So that's how they're doing that.
So this video is not going to get into like all the cool stuff you can do with the Nintendo thing. The video shows how, because the shape of those samples is the actual wave, how you can isolate any sound or sample you want as long as you can make it short enough, 3D print your own sample and use it with the Nintendo
3D
Labo
printing
keyboard.
would get you a lot of precision, but you could just take a piece of cardboard and cut it with a scissor.
Yeah, you could cut this out of construction paper if you really
be good
wanted
at
to,
cutting.
and it would
and
totally
be really
work.
Precise, right?
And you have to understand audio enough to be able to basically go into Audition and zoom all the way into a wave to where you're seeing the individual points, and then isolate the point
you'd
at
have to
which it
scale the
loops,
image
and
and
then
print it properly onto a piece of paper, and then cut the paper along the line very precisely, right?
Yeah, but he shows you can just do this in like Photoshop.
Yeah, you just
like,
have
it'll
to know
totally
the
work,
math.
and
it's not hard.
it's legit.
Well,
You
I mean, the
don't even
math
know
to
the math at all, just
scale
draw
the
it.
thing to the right size to fit in the Labo.
Doesn't matter as long as it's proportionally
really? It
the same.
scales
It
on
does
its
not
own?
matter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's
Oh.
just a proportional thing.
Nintendo's
Just
doing
get
the
the
math
wave
for you.
file.
Thanks, Nintendo.
Yeah, so it's pretty easy. The video is like 8 minutes long, and a lot of it's just setup. Like, it explains exactly how to do it. And if you don't have like Audition and the fancy software, it even shows you like, here's all the tools
You should just
can
make a
use to
Mario
just make
Paint
this
set:
happen.
Swan, Game Boy, Mushroom, Boat.
Yeah. Oh, he goes and gets some Donkey Kong Country
nice.
samples and sticks them in here.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. In the meta moment, GeekNights Book Club is The Tale of Hanja.
The Tale of Genji, not Hanjo.
Because we're not Hanzoing through this book. We're Hanjoing through it because turns out we only read when we're pooping outside of our own house.
I kept saying that
and
my
riding the
policy
subway.
was, I even just told this to my coworkers the other day. Everyone's like, reading any books? And I'm like, man, I had this policy of like, when you're on the subway, don't open a game on your phone, only open the Kindle app on your phone, right? And now I don't ride the subway,
totally
so
works.
I don't freaking open the Kindle app, right? I got all this other shit. I'm at home. I can like play my Switch, right? I can play my computer. I can do all kinds of stuff. Why would I sit on my phone with the Kindle app?
Yep. And most of my free time is spent either futzing around with like the streaming kit we set up so Scott's face can appear and all those things. Like, we're working on projects. I'm working on a lot of stuff. Also playing a lot of Overwatch and a lot of Civ 6. Like, a lot of Civ 6.
Playing a little bit of Civ 6. Not any Overwatch, obviously.
Yeah, but you've been playing in our live games. I never thought I'd get to a point when I'm, approaching 40, and yet I will sit down for 4 hours and play Civilization.
Well, this is letting us
live
get a
with
little
other people.
taste of the
Like,
retirement home, right? Early.
Yeah. I feel like our generation, more so than many generations before us, looks forward to retirement, assuming we overthrow capitalism and have an actual socialist democracy, so retirement can happen. I look forward to having infinite free time and no responsibilities, even if I'm in like a really simple cubicle home, playing like King Arthur Pendragon.
I got it
with,
ready.
like,
I'm working
all of
on
my
it.
friends.
I bet.
I got it
Right,
sitting right over there. It's still in the
Right,
shrink
we're
wrap. I'm
gonna
gonna open the
we're gonna
shrink
come
wrap
out
when
when
I
we're
turn
super old. I'm
65.
gonna be like, I've been preparing this campaign for 30 years. Let's go.
Yep. I'm going to play so many like RPGs when I'm old. It's going to be a good time. But we're not there yet. So otherwise, don't have any conventions to talk about. Don't have any like projects to talk about until we release them. We're not going to reveal all these projects until we actually do them. So we actually are forced to do them and not just get the feel-good feelings from saying we're going to do them. So let's talk about baking, because that's the other thing we're spending a lot of our time on. And considering there's basically nowhere I can get bread flour, I think everyone else is doing the same thing.
We got a ton of regular flour.
Yeah, we got. Yeah, I have 44 more pounds.
Well,
of
I got plenty of
flour
bread flour
hanging out
also.
in there.
But yeah, I mean, baking is something I've always, been into, even before college, right? I used to bake when I was, I'd make banana breads and cookies back in my middle, even elementary school, I guess. I don't know.
Like way more than me. I really only baked in like middle and high school, and then in college I technically baked, but in college I was just looking for calories, so my baking was mostly restricted to
making cornbread from a mix
and
isn't
like prepackaged. It's technically baking.
As soon as my mom let me lick the spoon with the cookie dough on it, right? I was like, I gotta learn how to make that cookie dough on my own.
Yep, I remember the moment as a kid of I can just make cookies. I could just go into the kitchen.
It's like, I gotta be able to do that. That's something I gotta learn. So I've been doing it ever since, right? So I know a lot of people out there are like, I can't bake. I suck at baking. I can't do it right, right? So I get to tell you how not to suck at baking, because I think that's a bunch of bullshit, because baking is super easy, especially compared to cooking. Because cooking, right, is a little bit sort of like performing jazz or improv music, right? You have to understand, the rules of music or food, right? And then you have to sort of mix things up, right? You can sort of, you don't have to you can add more ingredient, less. It doesn't matter too much, right? You can throw in a different ingredient because it's not going to be too much of a big deal, right? You heat up some oil in a pan, you throw some stuff in there, you cook it, whatever, right? It's cooking. Whereas baking is like chemistry, right? You have to...
Yep, but that's an important point. The fact that it's chemistry, not to say that there is an artistry and nuance to baking, but a lot of like dinner cooking, you can kind of just fudge it. Like you learn some fundamentals and you can kind of just wing recipes. And even if you're not super precise, things kind of just work fine. But at the same time, if someone just reads our recipe to cook a complex like regular dish, but isn't like a really good cook and like doesn't know all these things that the recipe might not say, you could follow all the directions and still get something that tastes bad. But baking, if the ingredients are real, like you're not using the wrong ingredients, and you follow the directions precisely on a well-known recipe,
right? So like you're cooking, you'll see a lot of cooks will have to like add some salt, taste it. Add some salt, taste it. Okay, it's got enough salt. How do you even know there's enough salt? Baking, you don't taste it. You're going to get diseases if you taste that raw flour, right? You can't, tasting the baking, right? You're doing a whole bunch of stuff, and then you taste it when it's done, right? And not before.
Yep. I'm not baking cookies, but like, you know what? I'll just put in a little more baking soda, give it a little pop.
Like, if you're developing a baking recipe, you might be doing that, like a little more, a little less, right?
Which is not something
when you're trying to figure out, right, what you want the final recipe to be. But once you have a recipe already, right, you do exactly what that recipe says in order. You follow all the instructions and you follow them exactly as they are written with no changes whatsoever, right?
If it says a quarter teaspoon of cream of tartar, put exactly 1/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar and put it in when it says to put it in. Don't mix it in early. Don't mix it in late.
And also, if you can, you want to increase your precision, I highly recommend scales, because you can see like a cup of flour. It's like, there are ways to measure a cup of flour, right? What you want to do is, you get your cup and you sort of, make sure the flour is sort of like, not densely packed. You want it sort of be like light and fluffy. You can even use a flour sifter to sort of work some air into the flour to fluff it up if it's all dense. And then measure the 1 cup of flour, and you'll get a better, more precise 1 cup. But really, if you have a scale, you want to find recipes that say this many grams, right? And then you can get exactly the right amounts, and your recipe is going to come out much more exactly like what it looks like in the picture in the cookbook, right?
Yep. And I guess because this is the How to Not Suck episode, the main advice I have for all of you is baking is a great thing to get into, especially during the current global pandemic, because it's hard to get fresh bread and things for obvious reasons.
The other thing is that it's not just weighing. Other tricks you can do to be more precise in the baking is, you mix something in a bowl, scrape down the sides of the bowl. That's ingredient you have there. right, on the sides of the bowl. You don't want to lose that and just by being lazy. You also, it's not just the precision of the ingredients and the order of operations and timings. It's also the temperature and the humidity in your
If your oven is inconsistent, nothing you do before, like, to the recipe,
you need to get a thermometer that goes in the oven that is not the thermometer that's part of the oven, so you know.
Unless you have an extremely fancy oven.
Even people with extremely fancy ovens do this anyway, so that you can see the true temperature in the oven with that little thermometer. They're very cheap and inexpensive, the oven thermometers. But also the temperature in the space you're in, based on what you're baking, the humidity in your apartment or the temperature in your apartment, or also the altitude if you're in Colorado or something, right? All of those things can mess with your chemistry, right?
Yep. Even if you're doing like baby's first bacon, where you're buying a mix and just kind of throwing it together, where the mix did all the precision work for you. Notice how it always says on the back, here's the directions. Unless you're at high altitude, then do
also
these
you might even
directions.
have to, depending on what you're making, things might affect it, like the water that comes out of your tap, right? I've heard things like, the water we have here is potable, but it contains something that messes with your baking, right? So they go to the grocery store,
right?
They go to the grocery store and they buy
too.
distilled water in a jug, right?
Like, remember when Pete, way back, our friend was making some beer, and it tasted exactly the way you would imagine a Band-Aid would taste if you ate it. And it turned out it was because of some radicals in the water, because of the nature of the water.
So now the next thing you got to worry about, so you got the instructions, you're going to follow them precisely, right? You need the good tools, right? You don't need the tools aren't going to make a big difference, right? It's sort of like golf. It's like, you can have the Tiger Woods golf clubs and you could give Tiger Woods some shitty golf clubs. He'll still kick your ass, right? So someone who's...
But a lot of the tools just make your life easier. Like, they're not like you can get by with shittier tools.
I made cookies and things my whole life. I would just take a metal bowl, a cheap metal bowl, and I would mix using a big, like a tablespoon, like the kind you would eat soup with, not even a special mixing spoon. And I baked
Oh, when we were kids, watching The Simpsons, my parents, every time they were baking, they would grab one of us kids, sometimes both of us, hand us a bowl and a spoon, and make us sit there and just mix.
And it's like I would just mix with, whatever we had. And it'll totally work, right? It doesn't matter too much. But there is sometimes a tool will drastically make your life easier, right? So some of the essential tools that you're going to want for baking almost anything, right, is the stand mixer, which is not this...
Oh my God! Our friend just gave us a stand mixer. Yeah,
the
I wish
stand
I bought one of
mixer
those before,
is about.
Earlier.
It's not just about saving yourself the arm effort of mixing. It saves so much time, right? You don't realize how much time it saves. It's like before I would mix a batch of cookies and I'd sit there mixing for like several minutes and it would take a while. Like making cookies would be like, a many hour thing. Now it's like making cookies takes like no time at all. It's like, oh, it's done. Oh.
Yeah. I get all the ingredients in the mixer. It's going. I turn around to do other prep, and then everything's ready. And it goes straight to the oven.
It's about efficiency. You're also probably going to want, based on what you're baking, if you need a whisk, right, you're going to want, a whisk that is, the right strength and size for what you're doing, right? Especially if you have to use a technique like, say, whipping cream into a meringue or something.
I hate whipping cream.
Then... sometimes you can do it in the stand mixer with the whisk attachment, but if you're doing it by hand in the bowl, which you might do for reasons, if you got a crappy whisk, you might have a lot of trouble doing it. Where if you have a better whisk, it's like, oh look, it whipped, right? Because I got a high quality whisk.
Make sure you've got all the things that a lot of younger people out of college they were in your house when you lived with your family, but you never thought to buy them. Get those rubber spatula scrapers.
You're also probably
get several of those.
You're also probably
going
to want like a metal scraper. It's like a metal rectangle with a handle on it, right? That you can use to cut dough, right, and also scrape things off the counter.
They're also just generally useful for all sorts of cooking.
Yeah,
when you don't need a knife.
It's a very good cooking tool. Also, a rolling pin is going to be important, right?
Yep. Get a real
the stone and the wood
pin.
Rolling pins actually have different uses. Sometimes you might be doing something like rolling out. Maybe you're laminating some dough. So I was going to talk about this also, but there's certain baking techniques you have to learn, right? And this is where, like, there is maybe some skill and practice, but it doesn't matter too much, right? So laminating is like an example of a skill where you're basically taking butter and dough and folding it and rolling it. Fold, roll to create layers. And that's why when you like open up a croissant, you see like these layers of flakiness, right? It's because they laminated it so many times. So that's like a skill that you can build is laminating. But like if you try to make a croissant and you sort of suck at laminating, you'll still get a croissant. It's not like if you follow the instructions, you're still going to get a croissant. It's just like the beauty of the croissant might be lessened, right? Its flakiness might not be as amazing and perfect looking. It might look sort of junky.
But I think what you do is the progression should be make basic stuff first and just like make sure the things you're making taste good.
Right. Even the ugly croissant is still going to taste delicious as long as you did it other parts right. It's just your skill and the technique is contributing to like is for taking you from like, delicious to like excellent, professional level, right?
Yep. But even with just like basic stuff like how to not suck, make like the simplest bread, the simplest sugar cookie. Like make really, really simple stuff first, and you'll learn all the basic techniques.
Yeah, making
really
the fancy things are
hard.
just, the same as making the simple things, only with extra ingredients.
Pretty much.
Whatever.
So JB in the live stream pointed out something, a very specific tool to get. Have more than one set of all your measuring spoons and cups. A lot of people have just like one measuring cup of every size and one measuring spoon of every size. That gets old real quick unless you
also want to get
like
a lot
week.
of bowls, right, of various sizes, and then you want to measure all your ingredients in advance into the bowls. And then start baking. Like, okay, combine this into that, and this into that, and this into that. Rather than measure, add, because now things are mixing while you're measuring, and it's like, oh no, you're in a hurry.
Yep, and sometimes the recipe will be like, while it's mixing, slowly introduce ingredient Y. So you've got to be ready to introduce it at that point.
That's general for all cooking, though, not just baking. But yeah, my point I was talking about laminating because if you have a stone rolling pin, that is great because when you're laminating, you want to keep it cold, right? You don't want that butter to melt. You want that solid butter to be, the cold butter to be folded, right? And the wooden rolling pin would not stay as cold, right? And you might end up, melting your butter and not getting as good action.
Yeah. Well, I guess what I would say is you probably want one good stone rolling pin, like a traditional looking one, like the one you see in old movies where someone's like menacing someone with them. And then a proper and then have like a wooden rolling, like the rolling pin.
I have one that's sort of like a
weird
shape where it's sort of like looks like a club you're going to hit someone with, but it's sort of fatter in the middle. It's fine. Whatever. But yeah, the high quality tools will make your life easier. You're also going to want like I said, the measuring devices, the scales, the instant read thermometer, all these, the oven thermometer, these sorts of things. Anyway.
Yep. Which leads to figure out the biases of your oven, like does it run hot or cold? And
so
then
I found out that
I
moved recently. I found out that the oven, because I have the thermometer, I've had it for a long time, was going cold.
Yeah.
So the oven actually has a setting. I looked up in the manual. I could adjust the oven. So I adjusted the oven to plus 15. So now the oven runs. The oven's internal thermometer is like, oh, I was off by 15 degrees, and now it's correct. So you can adjust that kind of shit on your oven. Get the manual for the oven and check it out. All right, so we were talking about getting better equipment. Obviously, getting better ingredients. I don't know how much needs to be said about that, but
Yeah, but the nuance there. Learn that there are ingredients that people don't realize are distinct, and if you start baking, you have to not mix them up. Like baking soda and baking powder are two different things. Bread flour and all-purpose flour are very similar.
Right, the bread flour has a lot more
gluten
than the all-purpose flour. So, some people can't eat gluten these days. It's a hot topic, right? But the gluten is basically like stretchy goop, right? That creates like the structure of the dough, right? With its form, I guess, right? It's like glue. So if you get it wet and it starts to activate, right? And then it sort of holds the shape of the dough together. So when your dough is rising, the gluten, the strength of the structure that you have made is holding the gases in the dough, right? So if your structure is too weak, the gas will get out and your bread will be like, right, all flat. If the structure is too strong, it can't really be too strong. But I guess if it's too strong, you would need even more gas to stretch the dough out. But that's just fine because you can just wait longer for more gas to form, which is good because then more flavor develops. So it's like the gluten can't be too strong. But if a different kind of flour doesn't have as much gluten, you can't get that added strength, right? So yeah, that's the other thing. So, most baking things out there, cookies, cakes, all this sort of stuff, do not involve yeast, right? There's no yeast going on. It's not alive, right? So you basically just do...
Yeah. You're going to have some sort of like baking soda thing, some sort of acid.
You mix you take the dry ingredients, you take the wet, you mix in the wet ingredient, the dry into the wet, and right, whatever. But once you get a yeast into the picture because you're making a bread or a yeasted donut or anything with yeast involved, because you're getting that rising action and also that sort of, lactic alcohol fermented kind of flavor sourness in there as well. Now you're working with something that's alive, right? A yeast is a living thing. So it's very temperamental, right? And now those things I was talking about before, the temperature in your room, the humidity in your apartment, the time that you wait for it to rise, the structure of the glutens, all that stuff suddenly matters way more once yeast is in the picture, right? So anything with yeast is harder than something that is not yeast.
Yep. That's why I'd recommend, if you've never baked before, like maybe even just buy one of those packets at the grocery store and just make it first just to get familiar with like kitchen stuff. Like some of you might be fresh out of college and not know how to do anything, but make like cookies first, because cookies, especially simple cookies, like a sugar cookie, it's kind of hard. Like even if you mess up the recipe at multiple steps along the way, they'll still turn out okay.
Right. So when it comes to yeast, there's three major kinds of yeast that you're going to find in your life. The one you've probably seen the most is the active dry yeast that comes in a little paper packet, right? Then there's the instant yeast, which is what I use. And then there's the fresh yeast, which is it feels like clay or like a putty of some kind, right? So the fresh yeast is like actually pretty fancy and good, but there's not a lot of like yeast in it. There's a lot of like cakey stuff, right, in there. So you sort of sometimes need to use more of it than you need to use with the other yeasts. And also it doesn't stay good for very long, right? So you have to put it in the fridge and use it quickly, right? Which is why they sell it in very small amounts, the fresh yeast. It's also the hardest to use, so I wouldn't use the fresh yeast unless you're like pro and you know what you're doing and it calls for it, right? The instant yeast is like the most powerful yeast, right? It's like these really fine, dry little granules of yeast. And 100% of them are alive. Every yeast in there is a living yeast. That's why it's instant yeast. It's like ready to go, right? But it only lasts like so long. So you gotta like freeze it or put it in the fridge because like they're all alive at the start, but then they'll all die and they won't work anymore. So if your recipe is calling for the active dry yeast, you want to use less. You can look up online conversions. You're going to be using less instant yeast if you use instant yeast because it's stronger, right? The active dry yeast is more like preserved kind of yeast, but only like some percentage of the yeasts in there are alive and the other ones have died, right? Because I guess they've been dried out or whatever. I don't know all those details. I just know that in the active dry yeast, less of the yeasts that are in the package are actually living. So that's why a lot of times, and they're sort of sleeping, right? Where the instant yeast, they're all alive and ready to go. The active dry yeast, they're sleeping. So a lot of the active dry yeast recipes, you have to wake them up first in like some water, right? Or something like that, and then use them. And you'll be using more of that yeast because, like I said, some of it is dead. So you need to use more to get the same number of live yeasts into the recipe.
If you get fancy down the road, you might like be cultivating and maintaining like specific yeast strains that do particular things that you care about. But I doubt many of you will get to that.
Well, people do the sourdough starter, and the thing with the sourdough starter is it tastes great. It's really good to have this, living sort of pet you have that you can add to recipes. It's like this ingredient that never runs out. And you can use it for all kinds of great stuff. It tastes amazing. You don't need to buy yeast anymore, right? The problem is the sourdough starter, like I said, is a pet. You have to keep feeding it, right? So if you're feeding it, you either have to keep feeding it flour all the time and then discard a whole bunch of it. So it's like you take it, you throw out most of it, then you add a bunch of flour, and now it eats the new flour you've added, and it stays alive for a longer period. Some people feed like once or twice a day, right? So if you're doing this sourdough starter, it's like, man, you're going through a lot of flour, right? Discarding possibly some of it. And if you're not discarding it, man, you are baking a lot of things that include that sourdough starter discard, right? Like, there's so many recipes out there, right? But it's like, are you really going to eat sourdough pancakes every morning and make sourdough bread every night? And it's like, you'll be buried in bread and you'll be going through so much more flour because you're constantly baking, right? The recipes aren't like, oh yeah, just take sourdough starter and bake it. The recipe is like, yeah, sourdough starter goes in to your normal baking as an ingredient. You still, you bake that bread at night. A sourdough bread isn't just sourdough starter plus fire. It's sourdough starter a little bit.
Yeah.
Right.
Don't just put
it's
your
just
starter.
It's like to make a sourdough bread, you take a bunch of flour, water, salt, and then instead of adding yeast, you put in a little bit of sourdough starter, right? And it's like, so if you're baking if you want your sourdough starter to not get thrown out, you're baking a bread every night. You're using flour for bread every night and flour to keep feeding the starter. So that's the reason I've never done that, is just because I had to buy so much flour, go through so much flour, bake all the time, right? It's good for retired people who are going to be playing Pendragon and have people over constantly and want to eat.
So I did see on the Wikipedia page, there's actually a formal definition of there are 11 things that must occur for something to be considered baking.
Okay.
Fats melt. Gases form and expand. Microorganisms die.
No, it dies in the
yeast
fire.
Still be alive when you eat your bread. Yep. Sugar dissolves. Any egg melt or gluten proteins coagulate. Starches gelatinize or solidify. Liquids evaporate. The Maillard browning occurs on the crust if there is a crust. Enzymes are denatured. Nutrient changes. There's a whole section I'm not going to read about what that means. And the pectin breaks down. So those are the 11 events that, according to this, must occur concurrently during baking.
Doesn't do all of those things. Only does some. It's not baking?
Then I get. It seems like it's still baking. I'm still skimming.
I
through
feel
this
like
article.
any one of those would make something baking.
Yeah. It seems like the real definition is around if those things occur as part of the cooking with grains, and they could not occur at room temperature.
Anyway, the final thing about baking is that, you know, all these things we talk about, like precision and following instructions and all that stuff, that is just to get you from ingredients to good tasting food, right? The final part of baking that you can optionally do is the arts and crafts mode, right? It's like you can make a delicious ass ugly cake and it will be fucking delicious.
That's my go-to.
But to make
I like a lumpy
beautiful cake, right? Now it's like, okay, I've prepared this frosting, I've prepared this cake batter, I baked cakes, right? Now I have to construct a cake, right? It's like, well, you can just take the cake, slap the frosting on, and it'll taste fine, and it's not going to taste.
That's my go-to because I've tried to make layered cakes before.
You put the frosting on artfully, right? It doesn't increase the flavor, but it's definitely a part of baking as a hobby is arts and crafts, right? Cake decorating, cookie decorating. There's some baking things like royal icing that taste awful, but you use them for decorating, or right? All this sorts of stuff, right?
We used to kind of often as kids, like we had all the piping stuff to like decorate sugar cookies and cakes.
Getting cookie cutters into different shapes, right? Rolling things out, right, into like spiral shapes, doing like some checkerboard cookie, right? You know, like there's these extra techniques and steps you can do to beautify the foods that you're making without necessarily increasing the flavor or nutrition or edibleness in any way, right?
And I guess you got to figure out your line between, is your goal to make this a hobby to make food? Is your goal just to make food?
Right.
Or is your goal
so
to
I think kind of like that where it's sort of optional, right? Whereas like some hobbies, it's like, yeah, you got to, if I look at, say, photography, right? So like, I take photos. Well, if I don't like doing the Photoshop part, which I don't, my photos sort of don't get out there very much, right? But with
neither one of us has updated our Flickr
but with
in a
baking,
while.
it's like, yeah, you can do the baking part, and if you're not into the arts and crafts part, you don't have to do it. People are still going to eat the food, right? It's not this.
Yeah, I will never turn down a
So
cookie
it's
no matter how ugly it
multidisciplinary,
is.
but you can ignore one of the disciplines. If you only like the arts and crafts and don't like the food part that comes before it, guess what? You can just do arts and crafts without food, or find someone else to make the food for you. I don't know.
Yep, or find someone else who wants to eat the food to make it all worthwhile.
But yeah, arts and crafts is definitely a big aspect of baking that's out there, right? You know, and no matter what you're baking, candies, you could do candy, like you're making hard candies.
Oh, candy
making is dangerous. You got to do a lot of. You can do sugar work though. You can do you know, there's a lot of creativity.
But like the way I describe it is baking. If you mess up and don't follow the procedure, usually all you're going to do is make something that tastes really bad. But with candy, you're going to start a fire or burn yourself, most likely.
The point is,
or
candy making is an
equipment.
aspect of baking where you can really get very, very creative and artsy, right? You're doing all sorts of, you know, things with sugar at different levels, right? You know, because when you're doing sugar work, you got everything from like hard candies all the way up to like caramels and everywhere in between, you know, stretchy taffies, right? All that stuff is just cooking sugar to different temperatures, right? You've got like tempering chocolate. You can temper chocolate, which is a sort of a somewhat tricky technique. But once you do it, you can like start coating things in chocolate or, you know...
Temper, like the same thing you do to a sword.
Sort of, yeah. Basically, tempering chocolate is where you raise it to a temperature, you lower it, then you raise it again while you're mixing it like crazy. And you're very precise about the temperatures. You also seed it with chocolate at different stages, but regardless, the result is you're controlling the temperature of the chocolate to get it to crystallize into a particular, you know, at a molecular level, into a particular crystal structure of the chocolate. So it's still chocolate. It didn't like change its flavor, right? You just...
Well, just like if you make a sword and temper
you just got the sugar,
metal.
the chocolate molecules to line up in a particular structure so that you get chocolate that is shiny and hard that snaps, like, right? Whereas, you know, the same chocolate, if you don't get it into that sort of shape, could be bendy or melty or sticky or sort of cloudy looking, not nice and shiny, right? So if you want to like coat things in chocolate, you kind of need to do tempering, right? It's like one of those techniques like laminating that you'd have to learn and do. But it's usually you would only temper chocolate since it doesn't really change the flavor of the chocolate. It does change the texture, which could matter for the eating experience somewhat, but most of it is about the looks, right? You could just coat something in soft chocolate, and how much difference is anyone gonna care, really, right? It tastes great if you buy fancy chocolates.
Yep. So the last piece of advice I have for you is if you can't get a hold of bread flour and you want to make bread, Google for how to just get wheat gluten and mix it into your flour. Like there's ways.
Yeah,
bread
flour is just
bread flour.
You know, all-purpose flour is just, you know, it's just a regular old flour. So that's another thing, right? Is people talk about like, you know, white flour and whole wheat flour, right? Unless you're dealing with like other kinds of flour, like, you know, almond flour or something, right? White flour is also wheat flour. There's white wheat and whole wheat. They're both wheats, right? It's not like white flour isn't wheat, right? It's just the white flour is only endosperms, I think, right? And the whole wheat flour, the wheat kernel has several parts, and it goes into the mill, right? It gets milled at a flour mill, and then it gets crushed, and they can separate out the different parts of the wheat, right? The wheat kernel. So the white flour is just endosperms only. I think that's the part that's kept in the white flour. Whereas the whole wheat flour is, they didn't separate it. It's just all the flour. All the parts of the wheat kernel are still there, just crushed up. So yeah, don't think that white flour is somehow not wheat. It's still wheat. But all-purpose flour is generally just white wheat flour with a certain level of gluten in it. And bread flour is typically the same thing, only with more gluten in it, because you're going to be making bread, you need more gluten. And whole wheat flour is just the whole wheat, they didn't separate out the parts.
Yep.
So if you're making like a whole wheat bread, very rarely will a whole wheat bread be 100% whole wheat flour. Usually you'll be doing something like 50% white bread flour, 50% whole wheat, something like that.
Yeah, but the recipe you're following
Yes.
will tell
but
you
like-
what to use. And if it doesn't specify, if a recipe is just use flour, 9
Right.
times
But
out
like
of 10,
say rye
all-purpose
flour, that's a different grain. That's not wheat. Rye is not wheat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's rye, the plant. Don't
Right.
make sugar cookies with rye flour. It'll
Right, but it's like
maybe,
if you make a
depending on what
rye
you want it
bread,
to
well,
taste
guess what?
like.
It's not a wheat bread. It's a rye bread. It's got rye flour.
I wonder what a sugar cookie
Ew,
with rye flour
probably
would
not good.
taste like.
But yeah, learn about flour. But yeah, if you can't,
Oh, it's a thing. People make them.
if you can't get bread flour,
good,
take
though.
white all-purpose flour and add some gluten to it. You can just get gluten. And also, just last thing, if you're doing some gluten-free bacon, you can't get any gluten in there. There's a lot of other things you can do. Most common I see is xanthan gum, is because xanthan gum is gummy like
Yep.
gluten, but it's not gluten, so it won't get a person sick who has celiac disease. So you can usually, take a no gluten flour and you mix in some xanthan gum and to a certain amount, and there you go. You have some sort of physical structure that can contain gas, and you've got the rest of the parts of flour, right? And you get some yeasts in there. They could eat it and make a bread.
Yeah. I think we've gone on long enough, and also I'm actually literally gonna go bake some cookies.
I'm gonna go eat some
probably
kind of
after
dinner.
the
I
show.
guess I'll see what's in the fridge. I don't know.
Yep. Because I just the other night I made some really trust me, sugar cookies are like the simplest possible thing you can bake.
I
and
forgot
it's
to
almost
turn on
impossible
it's
to
been
mess
getting
them
dark
up.
while we've been doing the
And-
show, and I forgot to turn on this light on the stream here that I have. I got this light and I didn't even use it
Oh, I
Yeah, I
think I
think you
lost
did.
Scott on the Discord.
because I bumped something. Anyway, I did. All right.
Scott just
the end.
disappeared. I guess we're done anyway, but Scott is gone.
Yeah, hold on.
Let me look at the stream. Let's see where.
No, so
Oh,
what
Scott
happened
even
was
froze.
I plugged in
Oh.
the light that I just plugged in is a
Yep.
USB light, so the computer got confused.
Yep.
The
and
audition
your
kept
stream
going, though.
froze and everything.
So
Yeah, audition will
audition
go
didn't
like
care,
a
but
champ.
everything else was not happy. Save that wave. All right. But yeah, I forgot to use the light, and it started getting dark, and I looked at the OBS and was like, oh,